There's a rule every soldier in powered armor learns on their first day of training. The suit does not fail. It was not a boast. It was not pride talking. It was engineering. 300 years of human ingenuity poured into a single shell of composite alloy and quantum lock servos and self-repairing nanomesh. The suit had survived plasma blasts at point-blank range. It had walked through the atmospheric collapse of a dying moon. It had carried soldiers out of nuclear craters still hot enough to melt rock. Generals had called it the greatest achievement in human military history. Scientists had called it indestructible. They were not wrong. Until her. She did not carry a weapon. She did not speak a threat. She did not even move toward him with any intention he could name. She simply reached out, the way you might reach for a falling glass, the way you might touch a stranger's arm on a crowded street to say careful. And her fingers found the chest plate of Sergeant Darian Cole's Mark 9 Titan-class powered armor. One touch. The suit went dark in 0.4 seconds. Every system, every redundancy, every failsafe that had never failed. Gone. And the war that followed was not the one anyone had planned for. This is that story. The colony on Vareth 9 was not supposed to matter. That was the official position of the Unified Human Expeditionary Command, delivered in the flat, bloodless language that military bureaucracies use when they want to say something without saying anything at all. Vareth 9 was a fringe world, a dust rock sitting at the outer edge of the Kelvari Reach, far enough from the core systems that supply lines stretched thin and communication delays ran to 40 minutes on a good day. It had 3,000 colonists, one refueling depot, and a single vein of terrathium or running through the eastern ridge that the mining consortium had been picking at for 6 years. It was not strategic. It was not symbolic. It was not the kind of place where history happened. And yet, Sergeant Darian Cole had been stationed there for 11 months when the Veth arrived. He had spent most of those 11 months doing the things soldiers do when nothing is happening, running diagnostics on his suit, eating food that tasted like compressed cardboard soaked in salt water, arguing with Private when about whether the Eastern Ridge sunsets were genuinely beautiful or whether they had all simply been stationed on a rock long enough to call anything beautiful. He had written letters home that he never sent. He had read the same 3 paperback novels so many times the spines had cracked and the pages had gone soft at the corners. He had kept his armor in perfect condition because that was what you did when you had nothing else to do, when the suit was the one thing between you and the fact that you were very far from home and very small in a very large universe. The Mark 9 Titan-class powered armor was, by any measure, a masterpiece of human engineering. Darian had worn it long enough that it felt less like a machine and more like a second skin. A second skin that stood 2.5 meters tall, absorbed directed energy fire without blinking, and could punch through reinforced durasteel with the casual effort of a man opening a door. The suit weighed 800 kilograms and moved like it weighed nothing. It had 17 redundant power cells, each capable of running the entire system independently if the others failed. It had a quantum-locked neural interface that read his movements before he completed them. It had an AI coprocessor that ran threat assessments at 40,000 calculations per second. It had never failed. Not once. Not in combat. Not in vacuum. Not in the molten surface conditions of Kelvari 3, where 3 soldiers from the 14th had walked through an active lava flow and come out the other side with nothing worse than scorched paint. The suit did not fail. Darian believed this the way he believed in gravity. It was not faith. It was physics. The Veth arrived on a Tuesday. Vareth 9 did not officially observe days of the week. The colony ran on a 26-hour cycle that matched the planet's rotation, and most colonists had given up on Earth time keeping inside the first year, but Darian kept a personal calendar on his helmet display, because some things you hold on to when everything else goes strange. It was a Tuesday 0340 hours local time, when the long-range sensors at the depot picked up 17 objects dropping out of FTL at the edge of the system. They were not human ships. The Veth were known to human space in the way that a rumor is known. Present everywhere, confirmed nowhere, described differently by every person who claimed to have encountered them. Some reports said they were insectoid. Some said they were tall and thin and moved wrong, like something designed by an engineer who had studied human motion from photographs, but never seen it in person. Some said they communicated through light patterns that shifted across their skin in sequences too fast to follow. The Xenology division had 17 competing theories about their biology and 12 about their intentions, and the only thing all 17 and 12 agreed on was that they had never engaged human forces in direct conflict. Never threatened, never attacked, never responded to hails. They simply appeared, observed, and left. So when the 17 Veth vessels entered the Vareth 9 system and held position at 100,000 kilometers without firing, without hailing, without doing anything at all except existing in a formation that Darian's tactical AI described as ceremonial rather than aggressive, Command told him to hold position. Do not engage. Do not approach. Maintain defensive posture and wait for instruction. He held position for 6 hours. The Veth did not move. He held position for another 4. Still nothing. It was during the 11th hour, when the tension had gone from sharp to the particular dull ache of sustained alertness, when every nerve is still technically ready, but the body has started filing quiet complaints about the arrangement, that one of the Veth ships detached a smaller vessel from its underside. Not a fighter. The shape was wrong, too smooth, no visible weapons array. Something else. It descended through the atmosphere in a long, unhurried arc and set down 3 kilometers for the colony perimeter in the flat dust plain that the colonists called the Flats because nobody had been creative enough to name it anything better. Command said, observe and report. Command said, do not approach. Command said, under no circumstances initiate contact. Darian watched his display for 40 minutes while the small Veth vessel sat on the flats doing nothing visible. Then a figure stepped out of it. One figure, alone, moving toward the colony perimeter at a pace that was not rushed and not cautious and not anything Darian had a clean word for. Moving the way someone moves when they have decided to go somewhere and have already resolved whatever internal argument might have slowed them down. It was tall, taller than a human, but not grotesquely so, maybe 2 meters, maybe a little more. The light was wrong at this distance, the pre-dawn gray of Vareth 9 turning everything into shapes and suggestions, but the figure moved on 2 legs and had 2 arms and held them in a way that read, even at 3 kilometers, as deliberately non-threatening. The skin, if it was skin, caught the light strangely. Not reflective. Something else, like the surface of still water just before it moves. It walked toward the perimeter gate. Darian was already moving before Command finished not telling him what to do. He told himself later, when there were people asking him to justify his decision, that it was tactical logic. One figure, no visible weapons, approaching in a manner consistent with intent to communicate. Xenology's own standing protocols noted that first contact opportunities were not recoverable. If you missed one, you missed it. He was the ranking armed presence at the perimeter. It was his call. He did not tell them that something else pulled him out there. Something that did not have a name in any tactical protocol he had ever read. He crossed the perimeter at a walk, his suit's systems running full, scanners active, threat assessment cycling, weapons systems in standby. The morning was cold and still. His boots left no marks on the packed dust. The Veth figure was perhaps 200 meters out when it stopped. It had seen him, or it had sensed him. The distinction felt important, and he filed away for the debrief he was already writing in his head. They stood looking at each other across 200 meters of Vareth 9 morning for a long moment that had no particular length. Then the figure walked forward. Darian held his ground. It stopped 10 meters away, and he got his first real look at it, and his threat assessment AI cycled through 16 readings in under a second, and then went very quiet, the way a system goes quiet when it cannot find the right category for what it is encountering. The figure was, he would spend a long time later finding words for this, and never quite finding the right ones. The figure was not what he had expected. The Veth, in person, did not look like the rumored insect shapes or the uncanny, almost human descriptions in the Xenology files. It looked like something that had been designed with an idea of beauty that was not human, but was not entirely foreign either, the way a piece of music from another culture can be strange and legible at the same time. It was slight in a way that surprised him. The height was there, but the frame was narrow, almost delicate by human standards. The skin was deep gray-blue, and the light patterns the report had described were present. Slow, soft pulses moving under the surface in sequences he could not read. Its face had 2 eyes, large and dark with no visible iris, and a mouth that was present but closed, and features arranged in a configuration that his brain kept trying to map onto human faces and kept failing to do. Not because they were wrong, but because they were slightly other in a way that became more precise the longer he looked. He realized, watching him with the same focused attention he was giving it. There was no weapon. There was nothing in its hands. It wore something that might have been clothing, layers of material that moved independently of the wind, which there was none of in a way Darien could not explain and his sensors could not categorize. It took one more step forward. His weapons system moved from standby to ready without him consciously instructing it. The Veth figure stopped, looked at the slight shift in his suit's posture that would have been invisible to a human eye, and then, with a deliberateness that was unmistakable with the slow intentionality of a gesture chosen carefully, it raised one hand. Open palm, the universal shape of not a threat, or the shape humans use for not a threat. He did not know if it meant the same thing to them. He stood very still. The hand came forward, not fast, not slow, the pace of a question being asked without words. The pace of may I. The fingers, 4 of them, longer than human fingers, the joints placed differently, extended toward the chest plate of his suit. And Darien, who had been trained in 17 forms of close-quarters combat, whose reflexes had been honed by 11 months of readiness drills, whose suit could have ended this interaction in any of 43 ways in under a second, let happen. He did not know why. He would think about that for a very long time afterward, and he would never have a clean answer. It was not stupidity. It was not paralysis. It was something that operated beneath the level of tactical calculus, in a register he did not have a word for. Something that said, "This matters. Pay attention." The fingers touched his chest plate. The contact lasted less than 2 seconds. In 0.4 seconds, every system in his Mark 9 Titan-class powered armor went offline. Not a cascade failure. Cascade failures he had trained for. Cascade failures had signatures, warnings, the suit talking to you in the language of dying systems. This was not that. This was silence. Total and immediate, the way a light goes out when the switch is thrown. No flicker, no fade. The neural interface cut. The power cells, all 17 of them, each independently capable of running the full system, went dark simultaneously. The servos locked. The HUD went black. The AI coprocessor stopped mid-calculation. 800 kilograms of inert metal settled onto Darien's body with the full weight of everything it was. He did not fall. The suit's locked servos held his posture, standing, slightly forward-leaning, the position he had been in when it shut down. He was encased in a statue of himself. He could breathe. The suit's passive life support, mechanical rather than powered, still functioned. He could move his fingers slightly inside the gloves. He could turn his head a few degrees inside the helmet. He could not do anything else. The Veth figure stood 2 meters away. It had not moved. The light patterns under its skin were shifting faster now, not in a way that read as alarm, but in a way that might have been something else entirely, something he had no framework for. It watched him with its large dark eyes. His radio was dead. His distress beacon was dead. His locator was dead. He was standing 300 meters outside the colony perimeter in a suit that had become a prison, alone with an alien that had just done something to him that no weapon, no force, no event in the suit's 300-year developmental history had ever managed to do. The suit had not failed. The suit had been stopped. There was a difference, and standing inside the dark silence of his dead armor in the cold morning of Vareth 9, Darien Cole had several long minutes to think about what that difference might mean before Private, when came running across the flats with a manual release kit, and the expression of a man who had just watched something impossible happen and needed someone to explain it to him. The Veth figure watched one come. It did not move. It did not retreat. When a manual release hissed open and Darien stepped out of his suit, small in his base layer, suddenly aware of the cold and the height of the alien standing a few meters away, it looked at him directly for one long moment. Then it turned and walked back to its vessel. It did not hurry. It did not look back. The vessel lifted in silence and rejoined the ship above. Within 4 hours, all 17 Veth ships had left the system. Darien stood on the flats with his dead suit beside him, and the dawn coming up hard and orange over the eastern ridge, and a feeling in his chest that he could not name, that sat alongside the adrenaline, and the confusion, and The beginning of the fear that command was going to have a great deal to say about all of this, a feeling that was not any of those things. He picked up his helmet. The visor was dark. He tucked it under his arm. One was staring at the sky where the Veth ships had been. What, when said, with the careful enunciation of man trying to make a simple word carry an enormous amount of content, was that? Darian looked at the empty sky. I have no idea, he said. He meant the Veth. He meant the suit. He meant the touch. He meant the feeling in his chest that was still there, quiet and insistent, like a word in a language he had not yet learned. He meant all of it. The report he filed that afternoon ran to 47 pages and answered none of the questions that mattered. The questions that mattered were these. What had she done to his suit? Why she had come alone? Why she had touched him specifically, deliberately, with the patience of someone who had decided on this action far in advance? Why, when she had accomplished whatever she had come to accomplish, she had looked at him, not at one, not at the colony, not at the sky, looked at him and held that look for the length of a breath before she turned away. What she had been trying to say. Command's response arrived 36 hours later, which was fast for 40-minute communication delays and bureaucratic processing time, and it said 3 things. It said, your armor is being flagged for full diagnostic analysis. It said, you are relieved of active duty, pending an inquiry into your decision to approach the Veth figure against standing orders. It said, under no circumstances are you to discuss the details of this incident with colony personnel or press. It did not say, well done. It did not say, this matters. It did not say any of the things the 47 pages had been, in their careful official language, trying to say. Darian folded the response and put it in his pocket and walked out to the flats in the late afternoon light, where his dead suit was still standing exactly where he had left it, locked in the position of a soldier at attention, staring at nothing. He sat down in the dust beside it. The eastern ridge was doing the thing it did at this hour, the thing he and one had argued about, the light going amber and then deep red, the dust catching it and throwing it back in layers, the sky above going colors that Earth did not have names for. Darian watched it. The suit stood beside him, dark and silent, and for the first time in 11 months, he was not thinking about whether the suit would protect him. He was thinking about her hands. The engineers arrived 9 days later on a fast courier out of Calvari Prime, and they brought with them the particular energy of people who have been told something is impossible and have decided to prove the people who told them wrong. There were 4 of them. Lead engineer was a woman named Dr. Priya Soth, compact and sharp-eyed, who had spent 20 years working on Titan-class armor systems and who walked around Darian's dead suit for the first 10 minutes of her inspection without saying a single word. She touched the chest plate where the Veth had touched it. She ran a portable scanner across it. She looked at the readout. She looked at the suit. She looked at the readout again with the expression of someone reading a letter that keeps saying something they cannot make sense of. There's no damage, she said finally. I know, Darian said. The cells aren't depleted. They're full. Every one of them, full charge. She tapped the scanner. The neural mesh is intact. The AI core is intact. The servo locks are intact. Everything is intact. I know. Then, why won't it turn on? He did not have an answer for that. Nobody did. He had tried to restart the suit 40 times in the 9 days since the Veth had left, following every manual restart protocol he knew, and the suit had sat dark and patient and completely unresponsive the way a very large and expensive paperweight might. It was not broken. Every component, tested individually, showed full function. But whatever the suit was, whatever quality it had that made it a system rather than just a collection of parts, that quality was simply absent. The way a room is absent of warmth after the heat has been cut, nothing moved or changed, but everything different. Soth and her team spent 3 days running diagnostics that, by the end of the 3rd day, were telling them the same thing Darian already knew. The suit was fine. The suit did not work. Both of these things were true simultaneously, which was not supposed to be possible, and Soth had reached the stage of professional frustration that bypasses anger and lands somewhere in the vicinity of genuine fascination. It's like someone unplugged a refrigerator, she told him on the evening of the 3rd day, sitting on an equipment crate outside the depot with a cup of bad coffee going cold in her hands. Every component works. The compressor, the motor, the thermostat, the wiring. But the fridge isn't cold. Because the thing that makes a refrigerator isn't any of those parts individually. It's the relationship between them, the coherence, the systemness. And that's gone, Darian said. Whatever she did, whatever the touch did, it didn't damage anything. It disrupted the coherence. It told the system, at some level we can't measure or even observe directly, to stop being a system. She looked at her coffee. I've been building armor for 20 years, and I genuinely have no idea how that's possible. The inquiry board from command arrived 4 days after the engineers, which Darian had been expecting, and it was every bit as pleasant as he had also been expecting. 3 officers, all higher rank than him, all carrying the particular expression of people who have been sent to find an answer and are increasingly aware that no clean answer exists. The head of the board was a colonel named Ferris who had the face of someone who had organized his entire life around the principle that clear protocols clearly followed produced predictable outcomes, and who was experiencing the Darian Cole situation as a personal affront. The questioning took 2 days. Darian gave the same answers he had given in the 47-page report, because they were the true answers and no other ones existed. Yes, he had approached against orders. Yes, he had permitted the contact. No, he could not fully explain why. No, he did not believe the contact had been hostile, a position Ferris found frustrating because the suit was dead, and if that was not hostile, he was not sure what the word meant. She didn't kill you, Ferris said, on the second day, with the tone of a man pointing out an inconsistency he cannot resolve. No, sir. She killed your suit. Disabled it, sir. The engineers cannot turn it back on, Sergeant. In practical terms, that is the same as destroyed. With respect, sir, it isn't. The suit is intact. What she did was demonstrate that she could stop it, not destroy it. Stop it. Darian paused. I think that was the point. Ferris looked at him for a long moment. You think the point was to demonstrate a capability? I think the point was to start a conversation. By breaking the most advanced piece of military hardware the human race has ever built. By showing us it could be stopped. Yes, sir. I think that was a message. Another long pause. And what do you think the message was? Darian had thought about this for 17 days, in the cold quiet of a suspension from duty that had given him nothing but time to think. He had turned the 2 seconds of the touch over in his mind the way you turn a stone, overlooking at what lives under it. He had thought about her. He had started thinking of the Veth figure as her, which xenology would probably tell him was an anthropomorphic projection, and which he could not help her deliberateness. The open palm, the patience of the approach, the way she had looked at him after, not with triumph and not with hostility, with something that his inadequate human vocabulary kept wanting to call regard. I think the message was, we know what you have. We know what it does. We know you believe it makes you safe. He looked at Colonel Ferris steadily. And we want to talk to you anyway. Ferris adjourned the inquiry for the day. The official finding, issued 6 days later, was that Sergeant Darian Cole had violated standing protocol by approaching and permitting contact with an unidentified alien entity, that this violation had resulted in the loss of a critical piece of military hardware, and that Cole would be formally reprimanded and reassigned to administrative duty pending full review. The finding noted, in language that had been clearly written and rewritten several times, that the wider implications of the incident were under active assessment by relevant command authorities. What the finding did not say was what Colonel Ferris had said to him quietly in the corridor outside the inquiry room on the last day, with nobody else present. What Ferris had said was this: if you're right about what she was doing, if this was a contact attempt, an opening, then you're the only person who's ever stood that close to a Veth and come back to talk about it. A pause. Command is aware of that. Darian was reassigned to administrative duty, but nobody took away his security clearance. The Veth came back 22 days after they had left, and this time there were not 17 ships. There were 43. They held the same position 100,000 kilometers out and did the same thing they had done before. Nothing. No chaz. No weapons. No approach. They simply parked 43 ships in the outer system of Verith, 9, and waited with the patient stillness of entities for whom waiting was not an inconvenience. Command went through 17 hours of emergency protocol before arriving at the same place it always arrived when the Veth were concerned. They did not know what to do. All existing doctrine was built around the assumption of aggression. The Veth were not aggressive. They were present, and they were waiting, and those were not the same thing, and the doctrine had no chapter for them. Darian, sitting in the colony administrative office reviewing supply manifests, received a visit from Ferris. The colonel sat down across from him and looked at the supply manifests and then looked at Darian. "They came back," Darian said. "They came back. More of them. 43 ships." "That's not a military formation," Darian said. 43 ships, same position, no aggression. That's a delegation." Ferris said nothing. "They're waiting to be received," Darian said. "That's what embassies do." A long pause. Outside, the depot was humming with the low-grade panic of a military installation that has received very large and very ambiguous news and is running full operational readiness, because that is what you do when you have no idea what else to do. "Command has authorized a response," Ferris said finally. "A small team, unarmed, approach to the flats and hold position." Another pause. "They want you on that team." Darian looked at the supply manifests. "I'm on administrative suspension," he said. "Command is aware. The inquiry found. Command is aware of the inquiry finding." Ferris leaned forward slightly. "Cole, 43 ships came back to a colony that contains, among other things, the only human being a Veth has ever deliberately approached and physically touched. I don't think that's a coincidence, and neither does Command." Darian thought about her hands. He had been thinking about her hands for 39 days, and he was not going to stop now. "What exactly is the team authorized to do?" he asked. "Stand there. Signal willingness to receive a delegation. If a Veth vessel descends and a figure approaches, do not engage, do not withdraw, permit approach. And if she touches someone again?" The pause this time was different. Waited. "Command is aware that is a possibility. Are the team members aware?" "They will be fully briefed." Darian looked at Ferris. "I'll go." He went without his suit. This was both practically necessary. The suit was still a very expensive dark statue in Engineering Bay 3, and he had decided symbolically right. She had stopped the suit. She had come to the unarmored man inside it with her open palm. He did not think coming back in a new suit would send the message he wanted to send. He did not have a new suit anyway. Command had not offered one. He suspected that was also intentional. The team was 5 people. Darian, a xenolinguist named Dr. Osei Boateng, who had been on Vareth 9 doing an unrelated survey and was now the most relevant expert on the planet. 2 junior officers who were visibly terrified and doing a very professional job of not showing it. And Ferris himself, who had apparently decided that if this went wrong, he was going to be present for it. They walked out to the flats in the early morning. No weapons, no armor, just 5 humans in base layer uniforms standing on packed dust, looking up at a sky where 43 alien vessels were doing nothing. They waited 2 hours. Then the descent vessel appeared, dropping from the formation in the same unhurried arc as before, and landed at what felt like the same spot on the flats, and the door opened, and a figure stepped out. Darian knew immediately it was her. He could not have explained how. Something in the way she moved, the particular quality of the deliberateness, the same resolved pace, the same arms at sides position that said, "I have already decided not to threaten you, and this is how that looks." She was the same distance away, and he watched her cross it the same way he had watched her cross it before, and the same thing happened in his chest that he still did not have a word for. She stopped, looked at the group of 5, looked at each of them. Her eyes found Darian. She walked toward him specifically, not the group, not the ranking officer, not the xenolinguist who technically had the most relevant expertise. Him. Dr. Boateng, to his credit, started cycling through the 17 opening contact protocols the Xenology Division had developed over 4 decades of theorizing about first contact, and Darian listened to him work through the first 3, light-based mathematical sequences projected from a handheld emitter, and watched her face while the protocols played out, watched for any sign of recognition or response. She watched Boateng politely. She did not respond. She looked back at Darian. He did something he had not planned to do, and which he could not explain afterward except to say that it felt correct in the same way the earlier choice had felt correct, in that register beneath the tactical, in the place where decisions are made before you know you've made them. He raised his hand, open palm. The light patterns under her skin shifted. Fast, complex, spreading from the center of her chest outward to her arms and face, a cascade of something he could not read, but which had the quality unmistakably, somehow, of a response. She raised her hand. Open palm. Boateng made a sound that in a less professional man would have been a gasp. They stood like that, two open palms, 5 meters of Verith, 9 mourning between them, for a long moment. Then, she did something new. She touched her own chest. Left hand, flat against where a heart might or might not be. Held it there. And then she extended the same hand toward him, the same slow question pace as before, and this time Darian understood it was not the suit she was reaching for. It was him. He let her touch his chest, her hand against his sternum, through the thin material of his base layer. He could feel the temperature of her palm, warmer than he expected, warmer than the morning air, and something else, a quality he had no sensory vocabulary for, a slight vibration that was not quite vibration, present, and then absent. She held the contact for 3 seconds. She looked at him the entire time. Then she lowered her hand and turned and walked back to her vessel. Boateng was already talking in the low, rapid voice of a scientist trying to outrun his own excitement. The light patterns, did you see the cascade when you raise your hand? I think it's effect-coded. I think those patterns are emotional signaling. If we can, Darian was not listening. He was standing on the flats with his hand at his chest where hers had been, and he was thinking, not as a soldier, not as the subject of an inquiry, not as the man in the dead suit. He was thinking as a person who has just been spoken to in a language they don't know yet and who understood it anyway. She had touched the suit to show what she could do to the armor. She had touched him to show what she intended toward the man. Those were not the same gesture. He was still standing there when Ferris put a hand on his shoulder. Well, Ferris said, with the careful neutrality of a man revising all his prior positions in real time, I suppose we'd better tell Command. Command's response to the second contact was very different from their response to the first. The first time, Command had sent an inquiry board and for engineers and a reprimand. The second time, they sent Admiral to Sir Vance on a flagship with a full diplomatic staff and the authority to negotiate at the highest level, which told Darian everything he needed to know about how quickly 43 ships had rearranged Command's priorities. Admiral Vance arrived at Verith 9-12 days after the second contact. She was 61 years old, silver-haired, and had the particular stillness of a person who had spent a career in situations where movement meant mistake. She had negotiated 3 major treaties in the border conflicts of the Kelvari Reach and was widely considered the finest diplomatic mind in the Expeditionary Command. She read Darian's reports, both of them, in the 2 days before her arrival, and when she sat down across from him in the depot's small conference room, she had the look of someone who has finished a very interesting book and arrived at the last page and found it blank. The touch to the suit and the touch to your person, she said, without preamble. You believe these were distinct communications? Yes, Admiral. Walk me through that. He had walked through it many times by now, but each time he did it, the argument had grown more precise. The suit was armament. Whatever she did to shut it down, she did it deliberately, and she did it before she came any closer. Like clearing a weapon before a meeting. Not to hurt, to signal. This is put aside. The second touch was direct. Person to person. After I signaled, raised my hand, she responded. When she touched me directly, she had already been answered. He paused. She wasn't touching the suit. She was touching me. The suit just happened to be in the way the first time. Vance was quiet for a moment. And you have no way to establish whether she specifically requested your presence for the second contact, or whether her return was a standing response to any human presence on the flats. No way to establish it formally. But she crossed me specifically, ignored the rest of the team, ignored Boateng, who was actively running contact protocols. Another pause. She came back for the conversation she started. Vance looked at him steadily. You keep calling it conversation. That's what it was. Without words. Without shared language. Without any confirmed exchange of information. 2 people can have a conversation without sharing a language, Admiral. You can have one with your hands and your face and the way you choose to move. What matters is intent. She came with intent. She demonstrated awareness of the protocol. The open palm was specific. She waited for reciprocation before she came forward. She made physical contact twice under different conditions that produced different effects. That's not random behavior. That's structured communication. A longer pause. And what do you believe she communicated? that she knows we're afraid of them, that we have every reason to be, and that she came anyway. He kept his voice even. That's not nothing, Admiral. That's the whole thing. Vance was quiet for a long time after that. Then, she said, you're attached to the diplomatic response team. Officially, as a liaison consultant. The inquiry reprimand is suspended. Not removed, suspended, pending the outcome of ongoing contact operations. He did not say thank you. It did not seem like the right response. He said, what's the plan? The plan was to go back to the flats. More officially this time. A portable communication shelter erected at the perimeter edge, equipment for light pattern recording and analysis, Dr. Boateng, and 2 additional xenolinguists who had been pulled from their own postings at considerable logistical cost, and a formal diplomatic delegation that included Admiral Vance herself. The hope was that the VETH would respond to a larger, more structured approach, that they would send more than one figure, that the light patterns could be recorded and compared against the Xenology Division's theoretical models, that the beginning of something like language exchange might be possible. The VETH were not interested in any of that. What happened was this. The 43 ships held position. 1 descent vessel detached, landed on the flats. 1 figure emerged. The figure walked directly across the flats to the edge of the delegation, ignored the shelter and the equipment and the admiral and the linguists, and stopped in front of Darien. Boateng, who was now recording everything from 3 angles simultaneously, made a sound that was professional delight and professional despair in equal measure. Vance, to her considerable credit, stood exactly where she was and did not make sound. The figure, she looked at Darien. The light patterns on her skin were doing the thing Darien had started, privately, to think of as the greeting pattern, though he had no basis for that beyond the fact that it had appeared both times she had approached him, and it had a quality that reminded him of the feeling of a door opening. She raised her open palm without waiting for him to raise his. She had learned that part. He raised his. She reached into the layers of her clothing and withdrew something. A small object, circular, flat, matte gray, about the diameter of 2 fingers pressed together. She held it out to him on her open palm. He looked at it, looked at her. She waited. He took it. The moment his fingers closed around it, the object did something. Not obviously, not light, not sound, not heat. A quality again like the second touch, in a register he did not have a vocabulary for. Like the difference in the air before a storm and after it, except interior. Like something very faint shifting to attention. She watched him feel it. The light patterns moved through their cascade. The fast, complex one that he was increasingly convinced Boateng was right about. That it was effect-coded. That it was essentially her face doing something her actual face was not equipped to do. She gave you something, Vance said, very quietly, from just behind his shoulder. Yes, Darien said. And you felt it do something when you touched it. Yes. Can you describe what it did? He thought about it carefully. Like a key being inserted, he said finally, not turned, inserted. He turned the object over in his fingers. Like the first stage of something. She was still watching him. She raised her hand again, but differently this time. Not the open palm, something else. Palm down, fingers spread, then a slow movement downward like pressing gently on something like settling. Like weight. She turned and walked back to her vessel. The vessel lifted. The 43 ships did not leave. They held position. Boateng cataloged the object as Artifact VX-001 and wrote 6,000 words about it in the next 14 hours and was not the only person who spent the night awake. The object defied every scanner they ran at it, not by absorbing or deflecting the scans, but by returning readings that contradicted each other, as though the object were made of something that did not have a consistent physical state. It was warm. It was room temperature. It was slightly below ambient. All 3 readings simultaneously from the same instrument. Darien sat with it in his hand for most of the night. He did not know what it was. He knew what it felt like. It felt like a message that needed him specifically to receive it, and he had no idea how that was possible, and also no doubt that it was true. By dawn, he had an idea. He brought it to Soth, who was still working on the dead armor in Engineering Bay 3 with the devotion of someone who had made this problem personal, and he said, what if it's a key? She looked at him. She looked at the object. She said, for what? For the suit. She stared at him for a long moment. Cole, the suit is a human-built machine. That thing, whatever it is, it's Veth technology. The two systems have no shared architecture, no compatible interfaces. There's no mechanism by which neither of those things stopped her from shutting it down. A pause. Touch it to the suit, he said. Soph picked up the object and looked at it and looked at the dead armor for a long time. She was a scientist, which meant she had a powerful competing instinct about the integrity of uncontrolled experiments and the risk of damaging an artifact before it had been fully analyzed. She also had 20 years of engineering curiosity that was about to beat the scientist instinct comprehensively. She touched the object to the chest plate. The suit powered on in 0.4 seconds. Every system, every cell, every redundancy and failsafe and neural mesh and AI coprocessor coming online in the same instant. The same total simultaneity with which it had gone dark. Not a restart sequence. Not the usual boot cycle of a powering system that runs diagnostics and initializes in stages. All of it, at once, the way a light comes on when the switch is thrown. Soph made a sound Darian had never heard from her before. It was short and small, and it contained approximately everything she felt about 20 years of expertise in countering its own limits. He picked up the object from where it had fallen out of her hand. He looked at it. The suit was running. Every diagnostic green. Full charge on all 17 cells. Neural mesh active. AI coprocessor running. She built a key for it, Soph said, in a voice that was working hard to remain scientific. She shut it down, and she built a key for it, and she gave you the key. Yes, Darian said. That means she understood the suit. At a level that she stopped. Started again. She understood the suit from a single 2-second touch. Whatever she read from that contact was enough for her to model the entire system and produce an enabling artifact in another stop. In 22 days. 22 days. The span between her first visit and her second. The time between shutting the suit down and returning with the key to wake it up. She had not come to hurt. She had come to learn. And then she had come back to prove it. She's telling us, Darian said slowly, that she's been studying us, that she can understand our systems, that she could destroy them. He turned the object over in his fingers, and she gave us the way to turn the light back on. Soph looked at the running suit. Why? He thought about the Veth fleet holding position in the outer system. 43 ships. Not an invasion. Not a standoff. An embassy waiting to be received. He thought about the open palm. About the gesture that said wait. About the way she had looked at him across the 5 meters and the language barrier and the 300 years of human armor development like none of those things were the relevant distance. Because she's not trying to beat us, he said. She's trying to introduce herself. The object sat in his palm, faintly warm or faintly cool or exactly ambient, all three at once. The suit stood in the corner of the bay, running perfectly, waiting for its soldier. Outside, 43 ships waited in the dark of the outer system. Darian looked at the suit, looked at the object, looked at the bay door, beyond which the flats waited in the morning, and the sky beyond the flats where the Veth held their patient position. He began to formulate a request to Admiral Vance. It was going to be, by any standard measure, a very strange request. He was fairly certain she was going to say yes. The request was this: let him go up. Not to the Veth fleet. Not yet. Not with a diplomatic delegation and a prepared agenda and all the formal architecture of first contact that command would want to erect around an event of this magnitude. Just him, in a shuttle, to the outer edge of the system, to hold position near the fleet and wait. The way she had come to the flats and waited. The way you return a gesture in the language you have been given. Vance read the request twice. You want to sit in a shuttle next to 43 warships. They're not warships. Not in posture. In capability. Everything in space is a warship in capability, Admiral. The question is always intent. She looked at him with the expression of someone weighing the professional risk of a decision against the certainty that not making it is also a decision, that staying still is its own kind of action with its own kind of consequences. She had spent a career knowing that. It was visible on her face. You go unarmed, she said. Standard shuttle, no military marking. Beacon running open so we can track you. And you take Botang. Darian had no objection to Botang. Botang had been awake for 36 of the last 48 hours, cataloging light pattern data, and had the specific brightness of a man who has been handed the defining work of his life, and is running on pure velocity. Boateng, Darien agreed. You approach to 10,000 kilometers and hold. You do not attempt to board. You do not signal except by presence. You hold and you wait, and if nothing happens in 6 hours, you come back. Yes, Admiral. She looked at him for one more moment and said the thing she had clearly been deciding whether to say. Cole, whatever happens up there, whatever the next step is, it starts here. With you. There's going to be people who resent that for reasons that have nothing to do with merit. There's going to be people who want to take this from you and run it through 100 layers of protocol and turn it into something safe and manageable. She paused. Don't let them do it before it has a chance to be what it is. He thought about that in the shuttle. 2 hours later, Boateng in the co-pilot seat running equipment checks with the quiet intensity of a man for whom this moment was the entire point of his career. The shuttle was a standard utility vessel, white, no weapons array, the kind of thing that carried supplies and personnel between colony ships and depots. It was not impressive. It was not a statement of power. That was the point. They cleared Varith 9's gravity well and began the transit to the outer system. Darien flew them. Not because Boateng was not qualified. He was perfectly qualified, but because there was something about doing this with his own hands that felt necessary. He had let her reach him. He'd taken what she gave. He was not going to sit in the back of his own decision. The Veth fleet resolved on his sensors at 40,000 kilometers. 43 ships, holding formation, running no emissions that his instruments could read as aggressive. At 30,000, they were visible through the forward screen. Shapes that his eye kept trying to map on a human ship design and kept failing, not because they were grotesque, but because they were built around different axioms. The way handwriting in an unknown alphabet is not illegible, because it is ugly, but because it was not written for you. At 20,000 kilometers, one of the 43 ships moved. Not toward him, laterally, sliding out of the formation in a long arc that opened to space at its center. A deliberate space. A gap in the circle, precisely shaped. An entrance. Boateng said quietly, they're making room. Yes, Darien said. That's an invitation. It looks like one. Command authorized 10,000 kilometers and hold. Darien looked at the gap in the formation. He thought about Admiral Vance's last instruction, the thing she had clearly meant underneath the formal parameters she was officially required to give him. He thought about the object in his chest pocket, the key that had woken his suit, the thing she had spent 22 days building. He thought about the open palm and the light patterns and the fact that she had come back at all when she did not have to. He thought about what it meant to return a gesture correctly. I know what command authorized, he said. He flew them into the formation. Boateng made a sound, not words. The kind of sound a person makes when the size of a moment is larger than their language. The Veth ships did not move as the shuttle passed through the gap. They held their positions around it as the gap closed, not trapping, surrounding, the way a crowd makes room for someone and then closes around them after, the way you're held by a place that is making you welcome. Every sensor Boateng had running was producing data faster than it could be stored. Light was doing things at the hulls of the nearby ships that neither of them had words for. At the center of the formation, one ship was larger than the others. Not a flagship in any human design sense. Not more armored. Not more bristling. Larger in the way that a cathedral is larger than the buildings around it. The same material, the same basic architecture, but in a different dimension. Built for a different purpose than any of the others. It had a receiving bay open, an obvious bay, a gaping circular aperture at the ship's waist, lit from within in the same quality of light that moved under her skin. Not a weapons port, not a docking clamp, an open door. Darien flew the shuttle in. It was the second moment in this sequence of events where he did something beyond his authorization and beyond his training and acting entirely in the register that had no tactical name, the place where the right choice announced itself in a language that was not language. The shuttle landed inside the bay. The bay closed. Atmosphere pressurized around them. Boateng's instruments confirmed it, close enough to human breathable that it might have been specifically prepared. That last detail sat in Darien's chest like a weight. They had prepared breathable air, which meant they had known he was coming before he had decided come. Or they had prepared for all possibilities, which was a different kind of knowing, a different kind of regard. He unlocked his helmet and put on the seat beside him and looked at Boateng. Boateng was staring at his instruments. Atmosphere is safe, he said, in a voice that had gone very careful. CO2 slightly elevated, oxygen slightly elevated, nitrogen slightly lower. Inside human tolerance. Well, inside. I'm going out, Darian said. I know, said Botang. I'm coming with you. The bay was high-ceilinged and lit in the deep amber blue that he was beginning to think of as Veth light, the shade that appeared everywhere they made anything. The floor was a material he could not identify, slightly yielding underfoot, not soft but not rigid. The walls had a quality that the walls of human ships did not. They were not blank, they were present, in the way that a face is present versus a wall, the surfaces doing something at the threshold of visibility that he kept almost resolving into pattern. They waited. She came through a door that was not visible until it opened, accompanied by two others. The others were different from her in build, taller, broader, the light patterns running in different configurations, but they held back, flanking, clearly deferential. She came forward alone. She stopped at what was by now a familiar distance. 5 meters. The greeting pattern ran its cascade. Darian raised his open palm. She raised hers. Then, she did something she had not done before. She spoke. Not in any language Darian knew or Botang recognized. Not a language designed for human hearing. It moved through a range that his ears caught partially, some of it in the registers human voices used, some of it below or above, the full shape of it not quite audible like hearing one strand of a chord. But she spoke. Directly to him. With the cadence of something being said, the rhythm of intentional address. Botang had his recording equipment going. His hand was shaking very slightly in the way hands shake when the body is overwhelmed and is doing its best to remain functional. Darian looked at her while she spoke and understood none of the words and understood the fact of being spoken to completely. When she stopped, she did not wait. She reached up and touched the side of her own head, a gesture that had the quality of pointing to something. Then, she reached in her layers of clothing and withdrew an object, larger than the key, flat, like a disc, with a surface that was doing the same contradictory thing as every Veth object he'd encountered, material that held multiple states simultaneously. She held it out. He took it. It was heavier than he expected. The moment it was in his hands, the sensation from the key was present again, amplified, the quality of attention, of something orienting. But more than that, images. Not precise, not like a screen or a projection. More like the feeling of a memory surfacing, except the memories were not his. Shapes of space. The sense of distance, of many stars, of a way of moving through them that was longer and stranger than human FTL. The feeling, brief, unmistakable, of something that might have been a name, not in words, but in impression, the pattern that was her. The way a face is a pattern you recognize before you can describe it. He looked up from the disc. She was watching him with the large dark eyes that her face rarely showed emotion through, but the light patterns were in full cascade, and whatever they were saying it at full volume. She's telling us who she is, Botang said, very quietly. He had one hand pressed flat to his sternum, as though his heart needed steadying. That's not a weapon. That's not a demonstration. She's introducing herself. Darian held the disc carefully. He thought about what he had in his chest pocket, the key. He thought about what she had built to return what she had taken, what that required. He thought about what it took to cross the distance she had crossed, alone, to a species you knew nothing about except that they built things designed to make them invulnerable, and that you could, if you chose, take that away from them. He reached into his chest pocket and took out the key. He held it up. Then, he held it out to her. The light pattern stopped. Every pattern on her skin, the constant ambient movement that he had never seen still, stopped for a single instant. Then they returned, faster and more complex than anything he had seen before, spreading past her face and her arms and running down her hands and up toward the crown of her head, a full-body response that had nothing cautious about it, nothing measured, nothing that was shaped for his benefit or his comprehension. It was, he understood, completely authentic. The language she used when she was not translating. She took the key from his hand, and then she did something that undid him completely in the simple directness of it. She curled her fingers around the key, her forefingered hand, joints placed differently, warm to an unconfirmed temperature, and held it against her chest where she had gestured before. The same place. The place where she had been trying to point to herself. She was keeping it, not as a trophy, not as a specimen. The same way you keep something someone gave you that means something. The way you put your hand over something you want to hold close. He understood then, not in the clinical language of xenological analysis or diplomatic protocol or military debrief. He understood the way you understand the thing that was happening in front of you when you let yourself look directly at it without trying to translate it into something safer. She had shut down his armor to start a conversation. She had built a key to prove the conversation was worth having. She had come back twice, past 43 ships, and an interstellar distance, and every reasonable caution a living being has about approaching the unknown, because she had decided he was worth coming back to. She was keeping the key because it was the only thing he had given her. He stood in the amber-blue light of a Veth ship at the center of 43 vessels in the outer system of a colony that was not supposed to matter, without his armor, with empty hands, with Boteng crying very quietly beside him and trying very hard to stop, and he understood that this was not the end of anything. This was the thing that comes before the beginning. The part where two parties confirm, across all the distances, language and biology and history and fear, that there's going to be a conversation. The Admiral had said, "Don't let them make it safe before it has a chance to be what it is." He looked at her, the key held against her chest, the light still running. "My name is Darian," he said. He touched his sternum the way she had touched hers. "Darian." She looked at him. She said something. The same register, partially audible, partly something else. 2 syllables, or the impression of 2 syllables, in the pattern shape that was her. He did not know if she was repeating his name or giving him hers. He thought, later, that it was probably both. The formal record of first contact with the species humans would come to call the Veth, a name derived from their own designation for themselves, as close as human phonology could approximate it, dated the event to the 3rd descent, the day of the disk, and the return key, and the 2-syllable exchange in a landing base smelling of breathable alien air. Darian Cole's official title in the contact record was Diplomatic Liaison Consultant, which was a description accurate in its parts and completely insufficient as a whole. He wore his rebuilt suit for the treaty talks, 6 months later, on a station jointly constructed at the Varith 9 Systems, L4 Point. He wore it because the Veth delegation had requested it, had specifically communicated through the early exchange protocols Boteng's team had spent 6 months developing that they wanted him there in the armor, that the armor's presence mattered to them. He would spend years trying to fully understand why. The closest he ever came to an answer was something she communicated to him in the 3rd year of formal exchange, when the protocols had advanced enough to carry nuance. That for the Veth, the decision to come to a being armored against the world and touch them anyway, to reach past the protection into the person, was the most significant thing one being could do for another. The suit had not failed. It had been the beginning. She had known that from the start.